Oh, that's
Almost.
cool. Is it working?
I think so. We just need to put
LA
music
not
behind
so
it.
confidential. I'll do some intro music.
Yeah, you do that. That's so funny. Usually I'm like, I know when to time that. And then you
Yeah,
and I were yapping, so we almost missed even the 4 o'clock window, as we
right.
do, as we do. Hey everyone. Let me see. Let me move to my comments here. Let us know that
Oh,
you're
that's right. I have the wrong one.
here.
Let me go to comments.
Um, I know three eyeballs are on us. Um,
Well, I mean, I have to say, there's a lot of going on in the world right now. So I
right?
can imagine if we have a smaller audience, but Catherine, we're so glad you're here. And
Hey,
Akiko,
hi guys. Yeah,
Gallifrey,
little weird.
oh, and
Hi
Cheryl,
Cheryl.
you guys, thank you so much. And Emily, of course.
Oh,
Emily,
hi
I'd come looking for you
guys.
if I couldn't find you,
Yeah,
if you
we
weren't
know where you
here.
are, Emily. I know. We just looks like almost had a president or former president assassinated. Um,
Yeah, that's a big deal. It's a real big deal.
Feel free to go
It's
back
a
and
turning
listen to
point. I mean, I don't know
episode
if it's necessarily a
107.
turning point, but it's not something that happens very often, and it usually is the bellwether for difficult times. So,
I know. Yeah.
everybody use your coping skills and breathe through this, and let's see where where everything falls, right?
Yep. I know. But yeah, good time to go back and listen to episode 107 on assassinations if you want, you know.
Yeah.
We also interviewed did a behind the couch with our friend that used to work for the Secret Service. And I'm so sorry, John, I'm blanking on his name, but he does criminal conduct with Javier Leyva. That was really interesting to kind of get his take after working
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, hi everyone. We're going to jump in a second with our guest, but we just want to welcome everyone who's tuning in. Thanks, guys. We see the
And Susan
comments
jumped in
flying
too.
by.
Hi,
I
Susan.
know. Hey. And Tool Girl. It's like we just did this a couple nights ago. But yeah,
Oh,
let me go ahead. What?
I was just gonna say, Tool Girl sent us the coolest videos of her machine shop.
She did on where?
Did you watch? Did you see that on
Where I
our
missed it?
messages? It was so
No.
cool. I just love seeing, like, she says, "I'm not really supposed to film this and post it." And I was
Oh,
like,
great.
"Oh,
Now
that
you're
is so
telling the world.
cool seeing what people do for work." So thank
I
you.
know. That
You're
is
not
very cool.
stalking me. Oh my god. Well, let me tell you, we're all gonna be a little bit on edge after you listen to our live stream today and this incredible guest we have on today. I have been Strictly Stalking's numbers are probably gonna go up today because I just marathoned literally while I was gardening for 6 hours. I've been listening on double speed to
Dang,
episode after
dude.
episode.
All
It's a
right, well, let
little
me
freaky.
let me introduce our new Patreon members just
Yes.
before so we can get started with Jake.
Awesome.
So I know we just did this a matter of a couple of weeks ago with our last live stream with Dr. Joni Johnston, but we do have a few more folks to add since then. So at the associate level, we have Suzanne, Lauren F, and Mindy H. Thank you guys so much. And then at the doctoral level, we want to welcome back Kelly M, one of our favorite nurses out there. So Kelly is back in our top tier as a Patreon member. And we appreciate you guys so much. I think I still have June
Absolutely.
Patreon mail to get out. So it's coming. I'll put it on my list to do this weekend. But yeah, with that, let me go ahead and add Jake to the stage. You want to start the introduction, Scott?
I absolutely will. We want to welcome Jake Deptula. He is a writer, producer, and true crime podcast host with an absolute insatiable passion for 1970s and 80s pop culture. So, like, even though he's a lot younger than me, I already love this guy. And as the co-host and producer of the true crime podcast Strictly Stalking, he has conducted over 100 interviews with stalking survivors from around the world. His series has garnered acclaim from survivors, advocates, and listeners alike for its role in raising awareness about the dangerously unreported and often fatal crime of stalking. With over 20 million downloads, Strictly Stalking consistently ranks among Apple Podcasts top 200 for true crime episodes and series. Beyond Strictly Stalking, Jake is also dedicated to developing and producing creative content. With over 15 years of experience, he has an extensive portfolio of television and film credits, including work for Lifetime, A&E, NBC, Bravo, CBS, Showtime, and ABC. He also hosts, because clearly he just doesn't have enough on his plate. He also
We feel
hosts,
you. We feel you. We know.
yeah, we can understand. Love Lust Fear is a podcast that delves into the darker facets of dating and relationships, and each episode explores true stories ranging from awkward and uncomfortable, story of my life, to the shocking and dangerous, offering candid insights into the complexities of toxic relationships. And we like to talk about toxic relationships here. So welcome, Jake. We're so glad to have you guest.
Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott, I'm so proud to be here. And Dr. Scott, I think it's best if I step off the stage now because I'm only going to screw this up. That was probably the best introduction I've ever heard. My mom doesn't even say that about me, so I appreciate that so much.
Tell her to give me a call.
No, she loves me. She loves me, but
Okay.
Of course, I don't inform my parents on everything I do, especially some of the darker dives into some of the content we do.
Yeah.
Right.
Although my mom is my biggest fan for Strictly Stalking, I do have to say that.
Aw, that's good. My dad's in the audience right now. He just
tell him I said hi. Well, I'm sure he's hearing my voice,
Alex checked in there in the comments.
There you go.
So.
Hey, Alex. Thank you.
We love parental support around here.
Oh my gosh, what would we do without it?
Well, I know.
No.
Hi.
But I appreciate you both so much. It's very interesting too, because Dr. Shiloh, you and I were introduced by Lenore Claire, who is this amazing conduit of true crime, pop culture, just everything LA based. And when she had recommended to me, she goes, I want to. This was like years ago when we first met. I was like, I want to do a podcast about true crime meets Hollywood. And she goes, well, in that case, you need to check out LA Natural Confidential. So I decided to binge those. So Scott, I'm probably like neck and neck for you for this is a mutual admiration society. We know this, right? We already know going into this. This is a loaded episode, right? But
awesome. We've already got like dual parasocial relationships going at the same time.
Absolutely. But no, I appreciate that too. Is like even just getting into this stuff. When I first started doing this, I'd come from the TV film background, right? Doing all this stuff, like doing Lifetime movies and reality shows and things like that, which offer their own sort of parasocial relationships, sort of things that you dive into the psyche of the human mind and the behavior. And when I started to get into that and I started to develop sort of this fascination with true crime, which kind of came from early childhood. I remember the first case that really fascinated me and I knew the world wasn't safe was the Adam Walsh case. If you're obviously familiar with that, John Walsh's son went missing and ended up, they found him sadly murdered. But I was a kid when that happened. And that really kind of woke me up at a very early age to how dangerous the world could be. So anything my mom would tell me about, oh, don't do this, don't do that, it was already being covered on the news. And I don't know why I was watching the news at 6, but I certainly was. Right?
Yeah. I have a very similar story. I mean, I think all of us who are in true crime probably have that moment, but same for me. It was when Richard Ramirez got caught, it was all over the news. But I remember sitting on my dad's living room floor and I was scared because they're, going over all of his crimes. And he was like, no, the bad guy has been caught. But I was probably, 1984. I was 6 years old. Yeah.
How frightening is that, though, if you think about this, is that what kind of impact that these people had on a community. And it wasn't just one crime. It was a multitude of crimes and sort of this pattern. And so there's a couple, situations like that when you talk about the Night Stalker, when you talk about John Wayne Gacy, when you talk about Ted Bundy, there were these alerts that would come out, right? That the community, like, don't hitchhike, don't take candy from strangers, don't get in cars, all these things that for a time we took that for granted because we were coming off the hippie era, peace, love. Hey, let's hitchhike across country. Certainly the end of the 70s put that to an end, like pronto, right? In terms of all these things that were happening. So I think that how the community basically adapts to these dangers, and you don't know what they're faceless at first until you get that first police sketch back then, right? It's kind of like, the Night Stalker was called the walk-in killer. And then the media sort of adapts and sort of rotates you through this cycle. But the fear in the community is really real. People didn't lock their houses. People didn't do certain safety things. People didn't look a certain way when they got into their cars and things like that. But, all these things happen. So,
yeah, I don't know. That sounds you give me like a fascinating book idea. Like just people's stories.
This is a free IP zone.
Well, but like people's stories of their first brushes with true crime and how it shaped their life and culturally and societally what was going on at that time. I would read the hell out of that. Like that sounds incredible.
It's very interesting you say that, because as you can imagine, as Dr. Scott said earlier, do I have enough on my plate? No, neither do any of us, obviously.
Right.
Just keep adding it. I mean, it's here Saturday afternoon and we're here. So let's
Yes.
be honest here. We really do love what we do. But I'm developing basically a series about that content, something that would be a scripted reenactment. And I'll just announce it here. It's called Slay Ground. And it's basically about the atmosphere around how the communities grasped with these killers and ultimately what other crimes were happening behind the scenes. So I have a TV exec. We're working on it, putting that together. But obviously, I would love to talk to you both off grid about that, because I think that'd be a very fascinating thing for you both to be involved with in every step of the imagination, because there's so much, and there's so much that we can learn from the seeds that were planted in the past from these things. I mean, everybody's very attuned to cyber stalking, obviously, right? Cyber terrorism, but a lot of those things are one-to-one connections a lot of times, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Grooming, things like that,
Indeed.
that happen. And before it was localized, now it's global. You know, the exposure of these rings, right? Sorry, I obviously I can talk all day.
No, that's okay.
I think this is a wonderful setup, and I appreciate it, because I think that there should be. I hope that maybe even through your project, this will give an opportunity for a more in-depth discussion about how much society turned a blind eye to these things. I mean, just, prior to the cyber generation, how many kids disappeared, and people just thought, well, I guess they ran away, because that's what law enforcement did most of the time. And they would say 11 and 12-year-olds ran away.
Yeah.
Oh, they're fine. They're just living their life somewhere. It's like, oh no, now I think the blinders are off for that, and we have to keep our perspective cranked open for it.
Well, Dr. Scott, based on what you said, one of the cases that fascinated me, the first one that really fascinated me about that was John Wayne Gacy, because how could someone operate for so many years and have so many things? And then when people, like, I often think about a case where when the police department wants to put the monster away, they feel they've caught the monster. But we all know, I mean, I'll take liberties with this, that Gacy had to have accomplices. There's no way a man of his stature, of his size, could have got under the crawl space, could have done all these things, had all these people coming in and out of his house, all these construction things, and not had some sort of support doing that. There were things, there were leads, there were things that were not followed up with, unfortunately. But the case that really got no media exposure, and it's something we don't talk about, is Dean Corll. Out of Pasadena, Texas.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Yeah.
That one to me, how can kids even disappear from the same school over 4 years and nobody hears about it? Like, even finding news coverage of that time. I think also too, to be fair, I think a lot of the times when there's anything that has to do with uncomfortability or crime, same-sex related crimes, that probably killed its opportunity to be publicized or put on the news desk. I think that rampant, when you take the crimes, you take homophobia, you take the times, I think that a lot of that had to do with why those cases weren't covered. Even the Gacy one, he was busted, in the 60s, you know what I'm saying, for soliciting one of his workers, basically, and tried to pay somebody to shut him up. I mean, all this, the whole timeline of these perpetrators' crimes are kind of there. But when you take an ill-equipped police department or a society that doesn't basically want to deal with such heinous things, here's where we are. You know what I'm saying? And luckily we're in an age now where everything's on blast, right? Everybody has access to something to speak out. But then with that comes a lot of static, a lot of, well, what's the truth? What's not the truth? I mean, we haven't even gotten to AI yet, but we're all real, right? We're all real here, right?
As far as we know.
God, you look like an avatar
anyway. So there you go.
There you go.
There's that for sure. But yes, so you mentioned that, of course, our good friend Lenora, who literally is the glue to this city. And that's how I've met so many people through her, is that she's been like, oh, you need to talk to this person, or to that person, you need to talk to Shiloh, and has just created a network of really cool people that, is the way that we got to meet you, really, when Tara Newell had done this true crime survivor and content creator meetup event, to where we finally got to meet you in person. What was that about 18 months ago?
That was
Now?
a lot. That I remember we were all wearing jackets, so I
It was
guess maybe
cold,
it's
yeah.
fall.
It was
Yeah.
cold.
So yeah, I think right. We were outside. We were love wonderful Amy B. Chesler offered up her home for us to congregate there. But it
Yeah.
was great because Tara is such a good person, has such a healing spirit about her that she brings everyone together, and that room. And I know,
Mm.
I'm sure I can echo your sentiments too, but I want you obviously to speak. I'm not going to speak for you both. I'm not your PR rep yet, anyway. But that being said, is that when you go around that room and hear those stories, the
Right.
magnitude of what some of the people had experienced and are still going through, and you sit there and like, I'm like, how am I even in this room? I looked at
Sure.
myself and I was like, right, how grateful I am to be there, because again, even with both of you, you have this amazing pedigree, you have this amazing experience in what you bring to the table, not just in the work that you put together, but your studies, your atmosphere, who you worked with. So I think for me, I feel so grateful every day that I get the opportunity to speak to survivors and how brave they are, and have an
Mhm.
opportunity to amplify that. And that I'm, for lack of a better term, rewarded or given such amount of gratitude for doing that. It really fires a passion in me that I didn't know that would exist in my trajectory in my life.
Yeah, I'm glad. That's a wonderful point to start with, Jake. In listening to so many of your episodes this morning and catching up, one of the things that I came away with was just this real profound respect for the space that you give these survivors. And what I noticed is that, I mean, every one of them is amazing and incredibly brave coming forward, and it's jaw dropping how much they've been through. And you can tell that I felt as a listener that you're creating a space for them not only to tell the story, but actually to move forward. Every time they tell the story, there's a potential for re-traumatization, or there's potential for healing. And this feels like that they know that they're part of something that's really big, with the amount of episodes that you're producing, making people understand that this is a problem and it doesn't get enough attention. And there's this, certainly there are some police agencies that will respond more quickly. There are some parts of the world that will respond more quickly. But just getting out there and getting this message to give people the opportunity to not take no for an answer when they're feeling unsafe. I think it's that alone. And I mean, that's just one point of what you're doing, but really great job. Great job.
I appreciate your words so much, Dr. Scott. When I look at this, I realize that it's the three components that I've been able to adapt to this is to listen, to believe, and to amplify. Okay,
Mm.
those are the cornerstones of what I've been doing with both Strictly Stalking and Loveless Fear. It's not something I set out to do when I jumped into this. And I have to give full credit to two people. One is Jamie Beebe, my co-host on Strictly Stalking, who actually got us into podcasting by wanting to do a podcast. And both of us didn't know pretty much anything about stalking, to be fair. We got it from film and television. You know what I'm saying? I watched The Bodyguard, watched all these things where, you see these sort of hyper stylized components of easily to spot stalking behavior,
Yeah.
right? These sort of fringe characters of society, like the glove sniffing guy over here and the guy who lives with his mother over there. No offense to anybody who lives with their mother, but except Norma Bates. But but that being said, is that you find these sort of components, and then now you realize is that when you listen to these stories, and I think as much as we rib on Lifetime, because I've worked with Lifetime before, for a variety of reasons, how they over dramatize certain things, they really did capture a lot of the zeitgeist of domestic problems in relationships, and how
Mm.
stalking is mostly done statistically by an intimate partner or a former intimate partner or somebody pursuing an intimate relationship. And it's not the characters in the shadows. It's not the characters, these fringe sort of outliers. It's somebody you may or may not have been in love with, a family member. And that really opened up my eyes to understanding how difficult it is for these people to come forward. And so for what we do, providing that space, it's not only a gift, but to your point, Dr. Scott, they feel so much less alone. I didn't realize there was a community that needed to be built, neither did Jamie. But when we put that out there, it became a place where people felt safe, they felt respected, and they felt heard, which is, you can't ask for any more than that along a mission of trying to put out solid, respectable, and potent content.
So did Jamie come to you with the idea of looking in this area of stalking, or were you like, she's like, hey, I want to do a podcast, and you kind of took the topic from the interest from your work previously?
I'll give you the story. She came to me and goes, I want to do a podcast, but I think they're all taken, basically true crime, right? She was basically, her words were a little, I don't want to quote her, but they were a little bit more like, all the good crimes are taken, basically.
Yeah.
Everything's been covered. And said, well, yeah, that's true. But what about stalking? And she goes, well, I don't know anything about stalking. I said, well, I don't either. And she goes, okay, I'll call you back. 3 days later, she comes back to me with this proposal, right? She did tons of research. She's really good at that, like diving deep into this rabbit hole and kind of shutting everything out and doing this. She and I are different in that I develop things so much and sometimes spend so much time on them that Strictly Stalking may not even have existed, or I'd still be working on it now 5 years later. But she's a first draft submission type. All right. So she's like, get it out. So we balance each other out for that project in that way. And it works and it functions as such. But I was like, okay, well, why don't we call it Strictly Stalking? Why don't we put out and figure this out? And the vibe, we ended up pitching it to a company. They liked it, developed it, got it out there. And it was one of those, to be fair, this never happens. I mean, I've pitched, I've sold projects, I've done things. They take sometimes years, forever. This was a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio where it was the right team, the right project, the right company, the right time, and the right era for podcasting, to be fair. We started January 21st, 2020. And here we are almost 5 years later. We're in season 5 now, 233 episodes released at this point. So yeah, we couldn't have imagined that in that aspect. But even from that, what I realized is that over half the cases that we cover are relationship based that turn into stalking, right? So when I was looking at that, I was like, well, there's a lot of stories here. And I know a lot of our listeners don't have a stalking experience, but they certainly have a toxic dating relationship experience. So that's how Loveless Fear came about, the combination of that. And then also my own problems, issues, or experiences out in the dating world, which is kind of what the nucleus of that was. And then what that became now. So that just launched April 10th, 2024. So we have about 13 episodes out of that so far.
Well, we'll have to, after today, we're going to have to revamp and have you back on for that show.
Oh, I can talk all day. So if you need me to just sit here and talk to a mic, that's great.
Well, and our listeners got a taste because we did a feed drop.
That worked out really well.
Episode.
And I was thank you both for granting me with your episode too. I love to be able to introduce the amazing work that you're both doing, but also, as you know, that the sort of cross section between Hollywood and true crime and my pop culture sensibilities just opened up my eyes to what you're doing. And it's something that, and Lenora obviously is such an anchor when it comes to that. And she does know everything. I mean, she is just an encyclopedia of not only information, but experiences. I mean, just her depth and her barometer of going through the Hollywood culture for so long. Not so long. She's not like the grand dame of whatever. She's still very young, by the way.
Right.
Well, I think you're hitting on something. Lenora, one of the things that is really amazing about her, and there's a lot to really appreciate there, is that, like you were saying, describing your most recent project of just kind of coming together at this intersection, that it was the right content, the right people doing it at the right time, and it happened. That's great. I think Lenore seems to be her own nexus like that. Like, she really has found this thing that has ignited all of what she has to offer the world. And I don't know her historically, but like I every time I see how much research she puts into her creative outlet, and it's amazing. But I want to get back to you, and I want to back up a little bit, because you've interviewed so many people, again, with such empathy, and never talking down, never condescending, never glorifying or going for the gore, which is wonderful. It's just these powerful stories. And I'm sure all of them are hugely impactful, but are there any cases or any particular stories so far that have really just they've traveled with you all through this journey, or they're the ones that stick with you?
Dr. Scott, I try never to pick out certain stories because everyone has a certain impact to it. But I will tell you, anytime there's children involved, I just see red. I have no compassion for anyone who abuses a child, none whatsoever. There's no reason whatsoever in life to do such a heinous thing. So for me, that really does get to me. But the weight that I carry with these stories, people have asked me before, don't you get numb to these things? And I said, no, I actually get more sensitive. I'm one of those people who want to do more. And you both know this, being professionals in the field, your hands are tied often by the law. I mean, the law moves slow often when it comes to these things, if at all. And it's not a very comfortable place where you have somebody going into trying to report these crimes if there's their own family involved, what the dynamic is there, and especially if they don't have any other support system. I mean, they more than half of our, I'd say 75% have to become their own advocates because of how not seriously their cases or their situations are taken. So for me, anytime there is a child involved or anything else like that, that really does hit me. I'd say has a pretty huge impact on me and my sort of perception of what they've gone through. You know, you just want to do more, but you know, sometimes you can only do so much in those cases, and just be there to help them amplify their story and let them share the traumatic experiences they have, because oftentimes they feel so good about just being heard, just someone to listen to. And they use those episodes to share with family members, to share with people they've dealt with before, because, you know, you go in these places, you don't want to be seen as the person who's XYZ, the victim of this crime or the survivor of this crime. And we often know this, we deal with so many true crime survivors that the first questions they're asked are about that. These are people, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And the incidents they've gone through doesn't mean that they have any less impact, but you really need to spend time learning to get to know the person, and then they can share in their own time what happened to them and reveal those details.
Yeah, it's an interesting area to navigate, especially as content creators, right? Like you were saying, being in that room for that event that Tara put on, that if you guys want to see snippets of it, there's a Vice documentary that was filming there that day. But we have to be mindful of seeing them as whole human beings, but also not completely ignoring the piece that, you know, they went through or their trauma. You know, it's like, we can't just pretend like that didn't happen either. There's both ends of the spectrum. So hence, again, the reason why it was so impactful for us to be in that room and listen to people's stories, get to chit chat with them over appetizers, right? Like just get to know them and talk about other things. Yeah. That was the important piece. It was mingling and talking to people and saying, oh, hey, yeah, I know that. But I think also reflective, some of the people in the room, you know, started thinking of ways, yeah, maybe I'm a content creator, but I've certainly experienced things too that are bubbling up for me. And that was really neat to see.
Did you both feel like this may have been the first time for many people there to feel completely safe and to feel amongst their peers in a way? Because when you look at it from the time when media gets involved, right? And we're all media in our own aspect, but when they basically dive into a story and they want everything's a clip or a soundbite or things that, you know, basically highlight the tension. But in that room, it felt like a community that I think there was a relief in a sense of so many people I spoke to that could just be heard, believed, and they could trust people around them in this room, which I don't think that's sadly a very common thing. Sometimes when you have someone who's gone through this horrible experience, it becomes they become basically, for lack of a better term, like public property, or becomes a public figure, and everybody makes an opinion based on what they think should have happened, could have happened. And that becomes the first topic of situation. But as you just said before, there was this light mingling and this sort of release and relief, even when we were going around talking about who we are, why we're there, and the support. It was just such a wonderful moment. And I hope that survivors get to experience that, especially the kind of stuff that, you know, we can provide, bringing them forward and being able to share their stories in a community sense.
I felt like there was a real development during there was just a progression from when everybody showed up. It felt very awkward to me. Because I think that people were tentative about whether or not it was a safe space, whether or not, they were going to be respected. And we were also blending a lot of different groups of people. There were people there that may never have an intersection with each other in society, really. I mean, and that's sad in itself, and it's reflective of some problems in the way our society is constructed. But I'll tell you, by the end, like, I was ready to go out, get a tank and a couple of weapons. I was so pissed off on behalf of the family members of victims that have been, sort of, not glorified, but have been put up for entertainment's sake. It just gave me a very different perspective when you're sitting there with those one step removed survivors of these horrible traumas. That gives you a much more profound understanding. So yeah, I think by the time I left there, I thought that was a really special evening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. And I even think, to your point, Dr. Scott, is that when you're in the position where your life is being dramatized or people are liberating themselves with your story, it's hard to dial back your narrative. And I think when I explain that to people, they ask me, like, well, even survivors, like, what's the best way to do this? And I said, the best way to do this that I've seen so far is to just grab a mic and do a podcast, because it's probably going to be the purest, most effective way that you share your story on your own terms before it becomes a TV series, before it becomes a documentary. Because and I know this coming from production, we all know this, there's so many liberties that are taken with that. And it's not always sort of nefarious or something. It has to do with timing, pacing. There's an expectation of dramatization when it comes to these things. But if you have the ability, which most of us do, almost all of us do, to share your story in your own words, I highly recommend that. Even if you're not going to put it out there for public consumption, get it down, get the files down and see how that feels. Play it back, listen with your own ears, and start to share it out there and see what happens.
Yeah. So, you've also, through all of this over the last few years, you've had the opportunity to collaborate with law enforcement, collaborate with private investigators about these cases. How did those connections come about? Were those all through Lenora, or did you forge some of those on your own?
It was a combination. We have dealt with, through Strictly Stalking, Jamie and himself have dealt with a variety of private investigators. I can probably call 7 or 8 of them now my friends. And we've developed different content. We've they've kind of, for lack of a better term, baptized me through the process in that way. I'm not declaring I'm a private investigator, but I'm private investigator adjacent at this point. So yeah, I'm not gonna
sidekick.
I'm a sidekick. Yeah, I'm like the dog in the motorcycle sidecar. You know what I'm saying? That drives around. I'm like the mascot.
We'll get a licensure for sidekick. There you go.
Please.
We can make that. I'll make it in Canva in 2 minutes.
I'm the human support guide. You bring me on airplanes for free. But that being said, is that so that's basically how that started. And I work with some wonderful private investigators, including Lenora, who's now a private investigator as well. Lenora was instrumental. I got to dial this back for a second. When Jamie and I were doing the show, we had met with her, and she was in development on her own show. And she was like, who are these 2 people coming out? What are they looking for? And she had a really interesting perspective on that, rightfully so, because she had been in a position where a lot of survivors have been exploited, their stories, even her own, without permission, because it becomes a public knowledge, a public domain per se, or public figure thing, news interest. And then she asked us, like, why are you doing stalking? And what do you know about it? I said, well, we don't know pretty much anything, but we want to learn. And she goes, well, that's good enough for me, because I don't hear that often. It's like, oh, this and that. Since I was a young boy, I was like, some sort of fairy tale about manipulating them to pull at the heartstrings, but it really wasn't. It was like, we actually want to learn. So it was instrumental about opening up the floodgates, introduced us to Terra Newell, which was incredible. And we became good friends from that. And so she was really instrumental. And she's also the one who sort of opened up my eyes to other opportunities, including which I'm sure we'll get into, is the FBI, where she basically nominated and brought me in to this Citizens Academy for the FBI.
Yeah.
So it's
Talk to us
allowed
about
me.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's allowed me to really see beyond, to be fair, TV and film, what we expect to come from the FBI. I remember, growing up with like the 80s Untouchables, you know what I'm saying? The Kevin Costner, Sean Connery one, which is a great movie, by the way. But about Elliot Ness and the takedown of Al Capone. But
explain what the FBI Citizens Academy is for our audience.
Sure. It's an 8 to 10 week program where it allows you to basically interact with high level agents, personnel, basically walk through case studies that they've done, go out, do in-field activities, really understand two things. What does the FBI do? What are they working on? And how can the FBI benefit the community? And to be fair, probably the most important part for me was, what can I do as a citizen to benefit the FBI? Going back to that Kennedy speech, that amazing. Don't ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Yeah. And it's very much about that. And I was really taken aback by how real, this is gonna sound weird, but how real these people were. They were like, you expect everybody to be very formal, but the jokes, the humor, the camaraderie, the things that you all know that you have to use to cope with so many of the things that you deal with, right? When you're facing all these things out in the world. And so it was amazing. So I went through so many things, learned about counterterrorism, forgery. There was a case study that they brought us into where they basically were able to thwart a Santa Monica Pier bombing. Mm-hmm. And it got a very small blip in the news, but what they showed us, they had found some innocuous thread on Discord, right? Some angry guy wanted to take down it was kind of a small thing. Hey, do you know anybody who could help me with some sort of weapon or something like that? From there, over the course of 6 months, 450 FBI agents, they set up a sting. He was building a nail bomb to set off during a race on at the Santa Monica Pier, where it would end there. They thwarted that just from that. And if that hadn't happened in all the circumstances, you know what I'm saying? Like, but how even that was beyond a needle in a haystack. So you look at those moments and you have such an appreciation for not only what they do in terms of addressing the direct threats, but those little tiny microcosms of the psychology behind someone who could be a threat, which brings up all kinds of, challenges legally and otherwise. But it was a pretty amazing experience for me to see how they went from one small thing to really avoiding a massive catastrophe and disaster.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the things that we don't know that were thwarted, and the work that's being done behind the scenes that doesn't even get a blip in the media. No. And probably rightfully so, because we'd be walking around terrified all the time of what has happened. But so one of our listeners right now is asking about where the FBI Citizens Academy programs offered, and most of the major offices in the different cities offer them. Your bigger and smaller police departments probably also offer a Citizens Academy. Most police departments do, and it's kind of the same thing. So it's several weeks long. I know at least for the smaller police departments, you go in once a week, one night a week, or one day, and you get a series of speakers essentially that, like Jake's talking about, talk about their expertise or their area of investigation. I would highly recommend you guys look into it wherever you live and apply for it. It's held usually a couple times a year. But these are really incredible opportunities to be able to sit in the room with law enforcement officers, really hear why they're serving their communities, and what the capabilities are in your city or in your county, or maybe even through the FBI, the federal entity in your area. So it's a pretty special thing.
And I that's well said. I tell people this, is that I don't know what your stance is on law enforcement, but when it comes to understanding what they do, it will give you a greater concept of the people that put their lives on the line for us and protect us. And there's all these comments. There's no perfect system per se, obviously. And I'm obviously privileged
because it's made up of imperfect units. You know, that's the thing that
Exactly.
gets lost, is that we want to hold our elected officials and people, the authority figures, doctors, whatever, we want to hold them to a higher standard. But in reality, they are just as human and frail and fallible as all the rest of us. But having, a relative who has been Secret Service and FBI, the amount of stuff that gets taken care of that we never hear about is astounding, like jaw-dropping. And that's, I think, what you're speaking to, is that we only got a blip of that incident, and there were, the FBI was going, probably searching all sorts of like databases and resources they had in order to quell this event, right?
100%. I mean, the resources and the time and the energy and the focus, you look at these people, and when you really understand how skilled they are and how talented they are, and how sometimes if they hadn't been looking one way, was just like dumb luck. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They talk
Yeah.
about these things, right? You just, it's these chances, and we have so many unfortunate catastrophes when it comes to bombings and comes to things like that. And in this particular case, I just find it fascinating that it was just some random innocuous comment on some, but it shows you. I mean, this is the whole thing too. We talk about how law enforcement should have limitations to certain things like technology or certain access privacy concerns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get that, but to be fair, law enforcement in most cases are doing things obviously under the banner of the law. But when you have hackers, when you have systems out there, bots, things that are set up to basically destroy your life, they have no boundaries. So wouldn't you want someone like them to have a little more access to things like this versus not even granting access and having somebody hacking into your account and have no recourse because you didn't allow the law enforcement the ability to do so?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we can extrapolate that to other things like, military grade weapons or resources and tools and things like that. And no, I don't want to see my cop that's walking down the street, all tacked out like he's in the special forces. But do I want a SWAT team who's available when something really, really goes wrong to have everything at their disposal? Yeah, probably. Especially if I'm the person that's being held hostage, or there's someone that really is really very dangerous that they're having to go interact with. So yeah, it's tough, but it has to all be obviously within the purview of the law for sure.
Do you both feel that it has to primarily do with abuse of power when it comes to these things? Because we all know that there's evils in the world, and we all know that on paper, people look at these things and say, well, this organization or this sort of department should have access to this, but other ones shouldn't. But I also often look at this as like, as we talked about before, is like people have access to our stuff that we don't even know about. There was a breach 2 days ago with AT&T that basically affected every single customer.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if banks, if phone companies, if the government can get hacked, wouldn't you want the powers that are protecting us the ability to do so? And not every, I understand why people would have conflict with what I'm saying, but I also look at it from that other side. The more I tend to understand about what the law enforcement's capabilities are and what they can do, because even with, stalking survivors, just to tail that back real quick, is sometimes people get great support. Other times they get no support, but a lot of times law enforcement isn't trained in how to deal with stalking situations. They're
Right.
trained to deal with direct threats. Somebody is hurting me physically. Please arrive now. Not someone is tapping into my phone. They're following everywhere I'm going. They've got my GPS. They're sending me nasty texts. They're and by the time they even find out who does that, it's ridiculous. I mean, try to subpoena Google or Facebook. Good luck. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of the tech companies are a little bit more cooperative than they used to be. I've witnessed
100%.
that in my day work, is like, even over the span of the 7.5 years I've been in this position, I'm like, oh, okay, there is some transition. And then I'll be the first one, is I'm down here in the mud with everybody else. I have mixed feelings about it, but I also look at the United Kingdom and I see what incredible success they have with CCTV networks, where nobody gets like, just like if we were to draw a parallel of that in regards to stalking behaviors. And, I was listening, the most recent episode I was listening to this morning was about the art gallery owner who had to move across country to get away from her stalker, who had a lengthy history of severe chronic mental illness, assault, other crimes, prison, inpatient psychiatric. And if there had been cameras that had been watching him, stalk her and follow her steps, that would have been made an easier case much earlier. But then again, you have other people on the other side going, but who has the access to that information, and how do you know it's going to be used in the right way? And it's an ongoing conversation that we all need to be engaged in.
Well, even to your point, who ends up at the end of the day, and this is the whole thing that goes back to technology companies, even like rideshare companies, who holds the accountability when someone is victimized? Okay. Is it the user? Is it the platform? Is it the person the platform gives the verification to provide the user with service? I mean, to me, that's kind of a 101 of understanding responsibility. But when you look at it, I mean, I've had friends who have had really scary experiences in ride shares. Okay. Very scary experiences. And you look at this and, the companies, they're an independent contractor. We don't have any of this, both the major rideshare companies. And so at the end of the day, you'd think like, well, they're the ones, my friend wouldn't have been assaulted if your company didn't exist. They are using it. Yes. And then every time anybody who has a phone or anybody who downloads an app, the fine print gives us almost no rights. I mean, that's really the bottom line. The accountability is on anyone who uses it. So at the end of the day, if you don't want to have a cell phone, you might be fine in the world for other purposes. Right. You may not be the most popular person on the block, but you'll have less legal wrangling if something happens to you. But that being said, is that those are the very important conversation to have. And Dr. Scott, to your point, the companies are being more, I guess you'd say, transparent with these things. And I think they understand they have to be if they want to grow, and they want to grow the public trust that's already sort of problematic in its own way based on, what the circumstances are.
Yeah, certainly. So what's the most fun thing that you got to do in the FBI Citizens Academy?
Well,
what did you enjoy the most?
when we had a bomb diffusing, which was interesting. I mean, let me put it this way. That sounds really could be problematic. No, basically it was where they lit a fuse and we were able to hold the line of the fuse going to the bomb and see what that would be like. So they had a robot come in and basically defuse it. We had a guy, one of our classmates, put on the vest, right, and the helmet and the whole, what a sort of Hurt Locker bomb outfit. That's the only thing I'm referencing, right? Yeah, like what you both
the bomb suit. Yeah,
you probably have them in your closet, right? Both of you do.
Right here. Yeah,
right here. I'm not wearing a vest right now. Don't worry. But that being said, is that and then the range day was really interesting. I got to fire a 1930s or 20s Tommy gun.
No way.
And there's a picture on my Instagram on that in my scroll. But that was really interesting. So I got shotgun, handgun, and I had shot a rifle before, but I'm not a big gun person, to be fair, but I understand the components of why they're needed. But it was interesting to do that and understand the mechanics behind the firearm. So for somebody who's never shot a firearm before, they do a sort of, if anybody remembers, this is aging me too, like the duck hunt sort of gun, basically, like that. They do something, it's more updated, but they do that on site at the FBI building downtown LA. And then we ended up, or actually, that's on Wilshire, so it's not really downtown LA, but more like West Side. But then we went out to the field, and it was like outdoor shooting range, and so they walked us through it. So I think that I could still be in that class. I was so fascinated by what they do and what they brought to the table. So for me, I would highly recommend it on just an education level. As I said before, it doesn't, to be fair, it's not your personal endorsement of the organization or anything like that. Because we had people in the class that were pretty vocal with certain things about their trust of law enforcement and other things that they have had experiences with before, to be fair. But what they want is to offer understanding and bridge the gap between the organization and the community. And it doesn't mean that you're vouching, validating, or going to amplify their cause, but it does mean that you'll have a greater understanding. You'll definitely walk away with that.
Yeah, I think those, virtual simulators essentially, to be put in positions where, shoot, don't shoot, de-escalating a situation is been such an amazing use of technology, especially when you put citizens in those scenarios. And obviously they don't have the training, right? So we're not expecting perfection from them, just like we don't expect perfection from any human. But just to feel what it's like when someone gets out of a car and is pissed off and yelling at you, and how quickly your body interprets that as a threat, even if, and citizens, unload their weapons into people that are not holding weapons on these virtual scenarios because their body gets hijacked, right? It's really interesting.
Yeah. Let me ask you,
did you do
both
that,
this.
Jake? Did you do that?
Well, no, I want to ask you both this. We all live in Los Angeles, right? That's no secret. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Unless Dr. Scott, you are overseas now. I can't tell with the backdrop.
Overseas.
But Charlotte, I can tell that's definitely LA. I don't know. But basically, why is it? Now, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally. So I grew up kind of more or less half my life in the Midwest and came out to California. Why is it that when you get behind a wheel in your car, there's automatically you're in this defensive mode? And it doesn't happen in any other city I've been in or anything else like that. But there's something about Los Angeles in traffic. And it's not just even being in traffic per se. It's just the way that people maneuver and drive. And let's be fair, I feel that it's gotten a lot worse and people have gotten a lot ruder since the pandemic has wound
100%.
down.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think the patience level of the lack of recovery is, I think to be fair, our patience and sometimes our filters have been eroded by whatever we experienced mentally or psychologically during the pandemic. I think there's a lot of things. We don't have time to unpack that here, but I just think that's very interesting in terms of when you talk about behavior and what that impacts. And even to both of what you both deal with is that so many of these things, you sort of have this sort of, for lack of a term, like this residual things that you just don't talk about, that you experience and that you see and that you find yourselves facing when it comes to survivors or comes to victims. So there's also those kind of things that when I've talked to other people about this is like, I tell them, I carry every story with me in a different way, but none of this outweighs the passion and the purpose that I've been able to find through what I'm doing. And I didn't anticipate that. I gotta be honest with you. I really didn't. And it's just, I feel very fortunate to be in this position to offer, any little morsel of what I can to share and amplify these stories.
So we've covered over the last 2 years when Shiloh and I were in absolute like warp speed mode. Once a month, we would do vintage episodes that primarily the majority of them were Los Angeles based vintage crimes that were just fascinating topics. And a lot of those episodes centered on the nascent emergence from toxic relationships ending up in crime, especially in old Hollywood. And, we are always upfront about how we're not sure if we're getting the information completely 100% correct from 75 years ago. I mean, who can say at this point in time? But is that something that you enjoy looking back at as well? I mean, for us, it gives us a room for conjecture. That's a lot of fun. And how does that play out for you? And what's your most interesting case, given your interest in sort of these dark relationships historically?
It's interesting you say that, Dr. Scott, because when I look at sort of the history of relationships and I look at what we think we know about celebrity couples, it's often driven by inaccurate or speculative information. Okay. If you go back to like the 50s, 60s, I mean, you had Confidential magazine, right? You had things that were, some of the stuff ended up being true. You know what I'm saying? Like the other night, I was watching a documentary on gossip in Hollywood just to get prepared for this and a little more refresher. I mean, granted, I did watch it before, obviously, but I just wanted to get, and so you look at like, Henry Wilson and his empire that he created with like Rock Hudson, and Tab Hunter and all these sort of what he built in terms of trying to submerge and try to pacify who they really were by what he could really sell in terms of this. And so you look at these things, and I think that the tabloids would sort of trip around certain things and certain relationships and certain innuendos at that time, because they couldn't quite come out and say it per se. And even there was a famous case, I'm sure you both know this, about when Liberace sued a London tabloid for basically calling him everything but gay at the time. And so he could never come out because he would have lost the lawsuit. So even when he was even when it was almost, he might as well have at that point before he passed away. So I look at that in terms of, okay, there's one sector about relationships that are there, but they're, let's say, hidden from the public eye. Then I look at a relationship like Sean Penn and Madonna, right? From the 80s, right? It was something that sort of fueled this sort of, for lack of a better term, Brat Pack adjacent Camelot at the time, right? There really wasn't any other relationship that took two big stars. And to be fair, Madonna was arguably, but I don't even think the bigger star. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh yeah, clearly.
I mean, Sean Penn's the better actor, obviously. No offense to Madonna, she can act, but Sean Penn is I think, he's one of the. I think he's one of the. Yeah, maybe Dr. Scott, we'll challenge each other over Trivial Pursuit later.
There you go.
Yeah.
But there you go. But I think he's really, really talented. But you look at that, and that relationship was volatile. Certain things that reported this and that. So I think that when you find those, even the one that captured my imagination too was Lenny Kravitz and Lisa Bonet around that time. So one of the things that I'm trying to work on is try to understand and put people in a position of the relationships before the tabloids got involved, before all these things, or during that time. So transfer people back to an innocent time between two people and what happened during that time. So even with Love, Lust, Fear, I'm working on a spinoff that would hopefully accomplish what I'm able to do with Love, Lust, Fear, and do it in a way that it becomes sort of a natural progression of a celebrity relationship without the many things that are speculative. And I know that's a difficult thing. It's not like I'm going to set up two mics and say, okay, Sean, you're here. Madonna, you're here. Let's get going.
Let's revisit this. I'm sure you guys want to dig it up.
I'm sure this is what you want to do right now with your lives. But that's what I want to kind of provide and kind of tap into my own sense of nostalgia and revisit the things that I feel, sort of left unresolved from my own childhood, growing up with these things and really understanding and how those things potentially shaped my own relationships. Like if I use that era, I use like, what were the biggest relationships of that particular, the 80s era? It was Sean and Madonna. At the time it was Mike Tyson and Robin Givens. That was a really big one. Right. And that so many things you say about that. Lisa Bonet, Lenny Kravitz,
Whitney and Bobby.
Whitney and Whitney and the funny thing is too, to your point, that Whitney and Bobby decided to turn their relationship into an IP. And by doing the reality show, I think they were one of the first ones who really understood that, better or worse, and RIP Whitney Houston. But I think that any other, now it's just a given that if you're a celebrity couple and reality TV or whatever avenue or venue is going to amplify that brand, whether it's a podcast too. There's a lot of couples that do podcasts and things like that, right?
Good point.
Which is all good for all of us. But I think that finding those relationships, I really want to kind of go on an exploration, understand those a little more, and hopefully it'll bring, all of us a more ability to relate a little stronger to them as humans versus these, amplified figures that we think we know about. And that's the goal. And I'm open to exploring. I mean, the relationships I'm going to explore, the couples could go all the way back from like the 50s, 60s, but primarily I'll probably concentrate on the 70s, 80s, and 90s, sort of my era of pop culture expertise. Yeah.
That sounds fun. I mean, you are clearly an idea man. So that
can get out of hand, though, to be fair.
I know.
Yeah.
I hear you.
You both know this. Yeah.
So as we end here, we're doing something new, and guess what? You're our guinea pig. But we're going to do a little rapid fire 5 questions at the end of our live stream here. Everyone, Jake did not get these questions ahead of time. So I know there's some other shows that do like certain questions sometimes, and I'm like, oh, if I'm ever on on that podcast, I have my answers ready.
I know nothing, by the way. There's no lies here. Jesus.
That's true. That's true. So if we continue to do this, if you guys enjoy it, maybe we'll change up a little bit depending on the guest. So this first one is a matter of opinion. This is not difficult, but I know it's in your wheelhouse. Best coffee shop in LA. What do you got? And you will be judged heavily.
Holy moly. All right. You know what? I'm going to give it back to my OG coffee house is Priscilla's Coffee in Toluca Lake. It is a wonderful place. I've known
Priscilla's is awesome. It's been there forever.
Right? Oh, yeah. Shannon and Mark are two amazing people. They offer such a comfort to so many people in the community. They're really just so valuable to the community and such nice people and delicious. I drink a ton of iced tea. There's iced tea in this, and Lenora bought this for me, by the way, since we go to Starbucks so much. But that being said, is that, Priscilla's Coffee, Toluca Lake, California, you can't beat it. It's just customer service, amazing people, amazing. And it just, you go in, you feel the way it's set up, you feel like you're home. It's a very home-like feel, the atmosphere, the community, the people there. There's nothing like it in Los Angeles.
Never been.
It's also in the middle of the studio.
We're going.
What was that?
We're going. We're going. We're all going to meet there.
I knew he would teach me a new spot.
It's also in the middle of all the studios. So my first casting job with Allison Jones, she'd be like, okay, go to Priscilla's. Time for Priscilla's run. It's like, Allison, we just did one 20 minutes ago.
God.
No, I need another iced coffee. Go.
I may have seen you there. I mean, before I moved to Hollywood, I lived in Burbank. So I was I may have actually seen you there hustling to get a coffee at one time.
Could have been. So, okay. Next question then. Favorite thing to do on a Sunday afternoon in LA?
Favorite thing to do, or what I've been doing? Let's see. What I've been doing is working, sadly, in a good way. I'm fortunate, but working on the projects. But honestly, I love brunches. I love those, and I love beach drives down to Santa Monica. I just love jumping onto like Sunset, hitting over to Santa Monica Boulevard, and just taking that all the way down to the beach. I think, it's one of those things. Yeah, it's amazing.
Sounds lovely. Favorite movie that takes place in Los Angeles?
Okay, that I have way too many. All right,
I know.
Jesus, I'm going through my Robert Altmans now. I'm going through. I mean, I could say, wow. I'll just go with The Player. I think The Player captures 1992. Captures everything about Los Angeles and Hollywood, and it's a great mystery thriller at the same moment.
And it's surreal.
Right?
Perfect.
It really is.
But not. I mean, it's
100%.
Yeah. What is something about you that would surprise people to know?
You both really know how to ask them.
And this is a psych test, just so you know.
Okay, I'll tell you.
I'm scoring as we go.
I'm a very social person, but I also really value my alone time. I can spend a lot of time in isolation, thinking, developing, and just sort of reframing to enter. I like to be very open and social, but I also do like my alone time, to be fair. So
excellent. Yeah. All right. So lastly, what's one cold case that you would like to see solved in your lifetime? Bringing it back to true crime.
This is the last question you have to ask.
This is the last one.
I mean, let's define solved. It seems like there's around every corner. I had named before. I mean, I would love to be fair. I'm going to go with this. I'm not going to pick one case. I would love for, let's just say, like, I'll use the John Wayne Gacy case since I'm from St. Louis and that took place in Chicago. I would like the families to get closure and to figure out where their loved ones are in that. I would like, whether it's accomplices or anything else like that. That's what I would love. I don't need it solved for me, but they need it solved for them. So I'll go with that case.
What a great answer.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. I mean, we were all kind of like buzzing leading up to this. We knew it was going to be good times. But we really appreciate you. We're so glad that you're a colleague in this space. And we should figure out something to do live together or collaborate on
well, you
together.
know this, folks. Our panel would be out of control with true crime, pop culture, dating and relationships, and I think we could do something really spectacular that people would enjoy and we would enjoy. And I think that's the point. I appreciate you both so much, and this is a real treat for me and a real joy and an honor.
Well, we will do a brainstorming session at Priscilla's. So
yes, we will.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you both so much.
Everyone, in the notes on this video, you'll be able to find links to all of Jake's work. So thank you guys so much for spending a Saturday afternoon with us. And we'll see you on the next Behind the Couch live stream. Everyone have a great night. Bye, guys.
Bye, folks.